Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to the Valentine's Views podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're listening across the Big Blue View Radio Network, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, Giants fans, we have Giants-Cowboys coming up on Sunday Night Football in the season opener. And here to help me break down the game is the great RJ Ochoa of Blogging the Boys, good friend of the show, despite the fact that he roots for the wrong team. But RJ's here to help me break it down. How you doing, my friend?
Ed, it's great to be with you. Great to have another NFL season back. It's felt awkward not starting with Cowboys Giants for a little while. You know what I mean? It feels like we're back to our roots. So it's great to see you in week one specifically.
You know, as much as we like Giants Cowboys is kind of traditional. It's gotten annoying as from the Giants side over the years because the Giants never seem to win that game. But but we'll get into it. It does feel right. It does feel normal to open the season this way, and we'll all be happy to have some football on Sunday night.
Oh, totally. And this is this is the best way to start a season if you're a football fan, or if this is your team, whether it's the Giants or the Cowboys. You obviously get the season opener, you get all day Sunday, you know what I mean? All that stress-free football you just get to consume. And then you get, then it's time to go to work. You sit down, you focus, maybe you smoke some meat or something all day on Sunday. And you get that's just, it's the best. There's no, it's I know that you know this, but like it's awful when your team plays at noon specifically because you miss so much that's happening across the league. But yeah, I'm really excited. This is my nirvana.
Yeah, it's weird. It does get hard when your team plays the early game, especially for you and me, because we watch our team play and then we have to work.
Yeah.
We're cranking out content, right? And it's like, oh, then a whole bunch of other games happened and stuff happened in the NFL, and maybe I'll just go to the internet and read about it.
Yeah, and that's always the challenge, but I just like you, I wouldn't trade it for anything else. And it's what makes things like Sunday night a lot more fun, right? You and I'll be up till it's an hour later for you, obviously, but 1 a.m. whatever it is, at the earliest, I imagine, and it's softened if your team wins, and that's certainly the side of the spectrum I'm hoping to be on a few days from now. But yeah, this is the best part of the year. I mean, I'm also a Houston Astros fan, which you know very well. So life is good once again in that sense. I'm a Manchester United fan, so I'm that Cowboys fan. Things aren't going all too well there. But sports are all the rage. The pumpkin flavors are everywhere. And soon enough, everybody will be walking down your street in Halloween costumes.
Hey, so as we get into the Cowboys and Giants and Sunday night a little bit, I asked your good friend Dave Halprin this in our 5 questions segment that'll appear on Big Blue View on Friday. But let me throw this out for you as Dallas starts a new season. What did you like about what the Cowboys did this offseason, and what didn't you like about what they did?
So I obviously like what they did in a vacuum, but if you compare it to what they did a year ago, it's all the more great if you're a Cowboys fan. So, and I think that's important perspective. You may recall a year ago, the Cowboys were coming off of an offseason where they traded away Amari Cooper. They couldn't get the Randy Gregory deal done in the 11th hour, and he defected to the Denver Broncos. They cut Lyle Collins, and some of those things, the Amari one certainly not, have aged well for the Cowboys. They promoted Terrence Steele. They just gave him a brand new contract. And so it really felt like they were a worse team on paper in 2022 than they were in 2021. And, and then you factor in that first opening game of the season, Dak Prescott injured his thumb. It just felt like it was insurmountable. They were never going to be able to overcome that. As opposed to this offseason, it was really frustrating, obviously, to see them lose in the divisional round again and not get back to the NFC Championship game again. But it felt like they really took things seriously. It felt like, okay, they identified some weaknesses and they found crafty ways to approach them. They traded for Stephon Gilmore. They traded for Brandon Cooks. They drafted Mozzie Smith. It was the first time, I don't know if you're aware of this, that they spent a first-round pick on a defensive tackle since they took Russell Maryland #1 overall in 1991. even since then, they have approached their own team in a wise way. They had a number of contracts that needed to get done. They paid Terrence Steele, obviously. They paid Trayvon Diggs at the beginning of training camp. They took care of the Zach Martin situation after a little bit of drama there. They obviously are preparing for a world where they have to pay Micah Parsons. And I always think of you with Micah because you were the first person who knew, and I say that seriously, not tongue-in-cheek, that he was going to be great. And they're going to have to pay him, in the offseason. And Nick Bosa just set the floor for that. A Dak Prescott extension is going to be due. CeeDee Lamb's going to be due a new deal as well. So they had a lot of work to do, and it felt like they accomplished everything that they could and then some. So it feels like they have finally started to take the football. Look, they're an incredible business, right? They're the most valuable professional sports team in the world. But it has felt like they have finally started to approach the football side of their operation with the same ferocity and intensity as they do the public relations side.
It's always interesting with the Cowboys. There's always attention, good, bad, indifferent. They're always the team, one of the teams everybody wants to talk about. Listen, I did your show on Thursday morning, and I want to talk about a couple of the things that we talked about in that show. The first one, you brought up the piece that we did at Big Blue View, the Daniel Jones roundtable piece, where we talked about, the question was, how many quarterbacks would you trade Daniel Jones for? And we discussed the fact that I did not put Dak Prescott on that list. The flip side of that is, if I were to offer you Daniel Jones for Dak Prescott, would you take that trade straight up, and why or why not?
With all due respect, absolutely not. I mean, I don't know that I would trade Dak for any quarterback in the NFC. I think that and you did a great job, I think, on our side of things, contextualizing that discussion that you had. It wasn't an exercise, as I understand it, in ranking the quarterbacks. It was a discussion of trading and age is a factor and all sorts of, variables like that. But that being said, if I did rank, right, if I did approach, it from a little bit more of that perspective, I know a lot of people think Jalen Hurts is better than Dak Prescott, and there's obviously a lot of data to support that. And I think we're all interested to see if Hurts can do it again here in 2023. But Dak has a pretty substantial body of work. I don't know if you know, he is the longest tenured starting quarterback in the NFL with his respective team. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is longer in the tooth, but now on a new team that shares your building. But for the most part, Dak Prescott has been, a top tier NFL quarterback. You mentioned when we talked, there is kind of a group at the very top of NFL quarterback tiers, right? Patrick Mahomes is his own tier. And then after that, I would put maybe Josh Allen and Joe Burrow in maybe kind of a secondary tier. And then I think the conversation starts for Dak or Justin Herbert or Lamar Jackson. And I think that third tier is kind of a revolving door. Maybe it's different week 3 and then week 4 and week 5. And, some guys have weeks where they float into the tier or float out. But I think that Dak is really just an incredible passer. And look, you mentioned it. The Cowboys are a really volatile, polarizing thing, and that often tends to lead to opinions that are on one end of the spectrum. And we're guilty of that too, in a positive sense, because we strive to achieve balance in the force. But we do our best, obviously, to be as objective as we can. And that being said, we're able to admit, that Dak is not Mahomes or Joe Burrow or Josh Allen, but I do think he is a cut below that. And right there, in stride, and has proven to be. And he had all the interceptions last year, and he obviously missed 5 games. And so that is kind of the demerit that everyone wants to see and to talk about. Like, oh, I don't like that. That is such an outlier as far as Dak Prescott's longstanding career at this point. And I'm not going to say that, there weren't a lot of interceptions that weren't Dak Prescott's fault, but there were a lot of tip balls. And that is something that the Cowboys have been really focused on this offseason and heading into 2023. So we do anticipate that to go down. But I think he's, in terms of just what he offers as a football player, he is one of the best passers in the NFL, aside from the leadership value that he brings. And I think that that's something that all football fans respect about Dak, is he is an incredible human being. And that's the person that I kind of want at the center of my operation, especially, heavy is the head that wears the crown of the Dallas Cowboys. And there aren't a lot of people who can survive it. And Dak is definitely, at least in my lifetime, somebody very, very different in that respect.
Absolutely, RJ. I fully understand your take on Prescott. I'm not sure you've convinced me totally, but it is what it is. We'll move on to another topic. I fully expected you to support Dak in that argument. And who knows? A year from now, it might be a different discussion. A year from now, we might all see something different, and we'll see how that goes. But I did want to ask you, in reference to Sunday, another thing we talked about on your show is the fact that the Giants have lost 11 out of 12 games to Dallas. They've actually lost 12 out of 14 to the Eagles as well. It's been sort of two tiers in the NFC East for a good while now. What is it going to take for the Cowboys to really begin to see the Giants as a legitimate threat, or are the Giants already there coming off of a playoff season?
So my view of the Giants is, and I say this in a complimentary sense, is a rebuilding team that had an incredible first season, right? Like so often in the NFL, that first year of a rebuild is really poor, right? And then you end up as like a team like the Lions, right? That is on the kind of common rebuild trajectory. But sometimes you have that first year that is incredible, and I think the Vikings are in a similar boat, who the Giants obviously beat in the playoffs, and I told you that I'm a believer in the Vikings and was a believer in them last season. So there wasn't anything, hollow about that playoff win in my mind. And so I do take the Giants seriously. Now, I'm only one person, but I do think that that's the general temperature amongst Cowboys fans. Like, yeah, you have people who want to, laugh about the fact that Dak is 10-0 in his last 10 games against the team. But people forget, I told you the Giants had the lead at halftime on Thanksgiving. And that was something, that the Cowboys struggled with last year. An expression that people used a lot was they were playing with their food. They haven't really been a team that's just been able to kind of vanquish an opponent and just like, put their foot on the gas and twist the knife and whatever. And their theme for this year is Carpe Omnia. I don't know your level of understanding of Latin. Mine's not great, but it means seize everything, and that's kind of their goal, is to just take everything, leave nothing behind, pillage everyone and apologize for nothing, and be the rulers of the entire NFL kingdom. And I think the Giants are operating in a similar sense, which is why I respect them. I by no means think this is, and that's where things are different. For a while, again, respectfully, I was never worried about these two games. I was never worried about the Commanders games or the Washington games or whatever. And even then, the Washington games have always kind of been a little bit more awkward for Dallas. They've dropped a couple in recent history, even through their carousel of quarterbacks and coaches. But last year, I think, woke a lot of people up. So I'm not above admitting that I think the Cowboys may split the series with the Giants this year. I mean, these are two games that are no longer stress-free. They are true, tried, classic division rivalries that you have to pay an inordinate amount of attention to. And that's what makes this so valuable for Dallas and for New York as well. But given that Dallas is the road team, if you start off the season 1-0, obviously that works well to your favor, but you're 1-0 in the division. And if you're the Cowboys, you have one of your 3 road divisional games under your belt with a win in hand. So I do take the Giants very seriously. I know a lot of people think they'll be, the common expression is, a better team with a worse record this year. That may wind up being true, but I really am bummed that Brian Dable is there and that Wink Martindale is there and that Joe Shane is there, because for a long time, it was easy to assume that the Giants would make the wrong and the poor decisions, but that is no longer the case. And I've been a real fan in an objective sense of just about everything they've done since Brian Dable arrived. Even the handling of Daniel Jones, you had to pay him. I know that there are Giants fans that disagree with that. The handling of Saquon Barkley, call it cold, call it callous, whatever, but they are a functional football team again, and it pisses me off.
And we like to hear that, RJ. We like to hear that. I always say that for there to be a real rivalry, both teams have to win sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's where the Giants are with the Cowboys and with the Eagles. As I said earlier, if the Giants are going to become, one of the quote unquote big boys of the NFC, they've got to beat the Cowboys and the Eagles once in a while. They've got to go beat the 49ers once in a while. And, and until they do that, then they're a nice team, but they're not really one of the big boys.
And that's fair. I mean, and I think a lot of people feel that way about the Cowboys when it comes to playoff success, right? Well, you make an NFC title game, right? Like it's an arbitrary line to draw in the sand, but it's fair in some senses. And so while I understand, assessing the Cowboys or the Eagles or the Niners, I think those are the three teams that are most commonly referred to as the three best in the conference as measuring sticks. I would offer that, I think that more people are starting to take the Giants seriously, and so I get feeling slighted because of whatever the last decade of football for New York. And you mentioned the other day the record, that they were tied with the Jets, obviously for the worst record in the NFL from 2017 through what was it 2021. But those days, like the darkest part of the night, is over for the Giants, and so it's a patient process. And I do regard the Giants as a blue blood, as a big boy that's been a little bit down on their luck, that's made some poor decisions, but the right people are in the right places now, and it's annoying.
Oh, let me ask you about one of the big changes in Dallas. Kellen Moore is out as offensive coordinator. Mike McCarthy is in, and Mike McCarthy never coached the Giants, but Giants fans have a little bit of experience with the Mike McCarthy offense because Ben McAdoo brought that offense from Green Bay. And one of the things we learned about Ben McAdoo was that's all he knew. All he knew was Mike McCarthy's 11 personnel. And if it doesn't work, you just practice it harder and you just keep banging your head against that wall until your head basically explodes. And so what we basically learned was, Mike McCarthy's offense didn't work without Aaron Rodgers or Brett Favre. And so maybe that was a Ben McAdoo problem. Maybe it was a Mike McCarthy offense problem. I don't know. I'm just curious what the feeling is in Dallas about McCarthy taking over the offense, and what are we going to see? Are we going to see them run what McCarthy ran in Green Bay? Are we going to see some sort of amalgamation of Moore's offense and McCarthy's offense? Just talk about McCarthy running that offense.
Yeah, well, so if Dak Prescott's the most polarizing person associated with the Cowboys, Mike McCarthy is a close second. And Mike McCarthy is easy. He's an easy meme for the internet. He's kind of an easy punching bag. And so again, that he's somebody that I strive to establish balance of the force with. And there are a lot of Cowboys fans who are not a fan of Mike McCarthy, but I think it's difficult to not look at what the Cowboys have done under him and admire it and respect it. I don't know if you're aware, but the Cowboys last year were a playoff team in back-to-back years for the first time since 2006 and 2007, a year that you hold near and dear to your heart. They won double-digit games, in back-to-back seasons last year for the first time since 1995 and 1996. I mean, that's a long time. You know what I mean? That Mike McCarthy kind of, and keep in mind, obviously, Dak Prescott missed 5 games last year. And so he has really done things that haven't been done before. And now he's obviously taking over the offensive play calling. And Mike McCarthy is a student of the West Coast offense, obviously grew up under Marty Schottenheimer and, in San Francisco and has worked with Joe Montana. And that's what he wants to do, is bring in the West Coast offense. But I think it's important to to note, that when Mike McCarthy arrived in Dallas in 2020, he was coming off of, if you recall, when he was the Green Bay Packers head coach, he'd ceded play calling, and then he said, I'm never going to do that again. And then he landed in Dallas, and Kellen Moore had this amazing first year as the team's play caller, and he allowed it. He allowed Kellen Moore to maintain that, despite saying, I will never do that again. And so I don't think he gets enough credit for being flexible like that. I think that is a hallmark of leadership, being able to kind of adjust and being able to change your perspective and to humble yourself. And obviously Kellen Moore, put up a lot of offensive numbers that are difficult to argue with, but the Cowboys kind of got stagnant to that point. And so I do think it is an amalgamation. West Coast is obviously an incredibly popular term in the NFL, but the Cowboys have adopted the Texas Coast offense because they're kind of blurring, Kellen Moore's ideas together with Mike McCarthy. But it's important to note that Kellen Moore was a student of Scott Linehan and a student of Jason Garrett. I mean, this is the first real, differentiation from Jason Garrett that Dak Prescott has ever had from an offensive standpoint. And he's, again, the longest tenured starting quarterback in the NFL with his respective team. So I think, we're going to see, everybody thinks that he's going to run the ball because of that offhanded comment he had at the NFL Combine. And keep in mind that 1 week after he said that, the team cut Zeke Elliott and traded for Brandon Cooks. But they want to run the ball, Ed. That's really what their whole identity here. And I think this is all about easy completions, maximizing, completions for the Cowboys underneath things. Everybody knows the names CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks and obviously Michael Gallup, but I would get to know beyond Tony Pollard, Deuce Vaughn, whose story everybody obviously knows, but Kevontae Turpin, who the Cowboys didn't really utilize that much on offense last year. They want those fast dudes in space underneath, those high percentage throws from Dak Prescott to just get the ball in the hands of playmakers. And so that's what I think we're going to see. I do think there is a motivation to run the ball well, but not a focus on it the way that people tend to think that there will be. And so I think we'll see an aggressive play caller. Mike McCarthy knows what he has, and he knows the weaponry at his disposal. And so he's not here to punt. And I think that, and no pun intended, I think that a lot of people do view him as this pushover, but he has a Mercedes and he knows how to drive it.
I have to ask you, it's been a while, but how weird is it to see a Cowboys team without Ezekiel Elliott?
The landscape of the running back position and the discussion around it really kind of happened all throughout his time in Dallas. And obviously you're well aware of that with the Saquon Barkley era. And that first year was just so remarkable. And some of it was the youthfulness of Zeke and Dak, obviously, and that happening simultaneously and the kind of wonder of it all. And you know how difficult it is to say goodbye to a franchise great, particularly like the quarterback position. And so, I mean, it was such an emotionally charged time. And then, I think people forget too, the 2017 season had the suspension thing hanging over him. So there was this this us against the world mentality. The NFL's out for Zeke type stuff. And then the next year they traded for Amari Cooper. Like there's been this volatility almost every year, some sort of massive narrative hanging over the Cowboys in the Zeke era. And so it is different. But I think that, again, with all due respect to Zeke, I think people are really happy about it. You said it yourself to me. It's been obvious for 2 years that he's not the best running back on the team. And you can call it finances, being the primary motivation, but the Cowboys continue to use him. He had 12 touchdowns last year. I would challenge you to go look at the distances traveled on each of them. I mean, we're talking 2 yards, 1 yard, 3 yards. I mean, it was all goal line work. And the reality is that when Zeke Elliott was on the field last year, the Cowboys were less explosive. And that has been the primary objective, is to get more explosive on offense, which is why they traded for Brandon Cooks, which is why they franchise tagged Tony Pollard, which is why they drafted Deuce Vaughn, and why they plan to utilize Kevontae Turpin more on the offensive side of the ball. Zeke Elliott is a fabulous player and a Dallas Cowboys legend. And if Jerry Jones has anything to do with it, we'll probably have his name in the Ring of Honor someday. But he was, to be blunt, a misuse of an incredibly valuable resource. I mean, the 4th overall pick and then a second contract. And so that's also back to your first question, where it's been so refreshing to see the Cowboys kind of operate in a forward-thinking way, in a modern way. And moving on from Zeke Elliott, as difficult as it is, again, to say goodbye to a franchise great, it was significant in that it shows the Cowboys are willing to be objective and to make hard decisions. And I think people were a fan of that specifically.
Understood. I know the Giants are going to be facing that same dilemma with Saquon Barkley. And I think I know where it's headed. I think if they weren't going to give Barkley a long-term deal after last season, I don't think they're going to give him a long-term deal after this coming season either. I think they're going to play hardball with Barkley. I think they're going to tag him again. And I think probably after next season, the Giants are in a post-Barkley era. It's just that sadly is the smart way to do things with running backs these days, is because they're better early in their career than late. The evidence is overwhelming.
It's unfortunate. And, I know you are always rooting for players to get as much as they can, as soon as they can. I mean, your career is such a fleeting thing. But again, if you're being frank, if you're being objective, I mean, you're completely right. I mean, obviously look at what happened this offseason. Saquon Barkley was upset. Nothing happened. Josh Jacobs was upset. Nothing happened. Jonathan Taylor is the only dude who's kind of dragging this on a little bit, but I would bet you that he's probably going to return after the pup list 4-week period and play this season out, and hope he gets paid in the offseason. But I mean, what evidence is there who is Christian McCaffrey has a big deal, obviously, and he's kind of worth it, but he's the unicorn. It's the moment that the Cowboys paid Zeke Elliott was the moment, and it was coincidental, but his production really dropped off. He was a fine player in 2019, but ever since then, it just really took its toll. And that was also the year that they drafted Tony Pollard. And so it did become a point of frustration for Cowboys fans that the team was utilizing Zeke so much last year because Tony Pollard seemed to offer a lot more.
Before I ask you for a pick on Sunday's game, let me ask you this, something sort of Giants specific. When you look at this different Giants team, than the one that the Giants fielded a year ago, what, if anything, concerns you when you look at the Giants and you say, that's really something they couldn't do a year ago, or that's really something where I'm not sure Dallas matches up and you're worried about it?
I would say the variety of offensive skill position players. I've never been worried about Sterling Shepard. I was never worried about Kadarius Toney, obviously, in that brief little window. Never really been worried about Saquon kind of taking over the game because, again, the kind of perspective on running backs and whatnot. But Darren Waller is dynamic. I mean, there's no question about it. And if he hits that ceiling, I mean, if he returns to the form we've seen him have, if he stays healthy, I mean, that's a huge problem. I'm so upset that Jalen Hyatt fell to the Giants. I do feel like that's something we're going to look back on and be like, why did everybody forget in the lead up to the draft process that he was this amazing wide receiver in college? I think the Paris Campbell signing is a little bit underrated and not talked about enough. And so in that respect, Sterling Shepard doesn't have to be your superstar, right? Like, if all of a sudden Sterling Shepard is just one of the dudes and you have several dudes, I think this is the most, the largest variety of offensive talent that the Giants have had in a very, very long time. Even in the early Odell days, I was never troubled with the Giants skill position group because it just felt like Odell and a bunch of dudes, and it felt like you could survive that. I mean, the Cowboys literally survived the greatest catch of all time by a lot of people's estimation and won the game that it happened in. So it's a bummer. And I do think that a rising tide lifts the quarterback boat specifically. I think if you look back at Brian Dable's previous stop, when Josh Allen had, people forget that Josh Allen wasn't this like amazingly accurate passer early on. It wasn't until the Bills traded for Stephon Diggs and brought in Cole Beasley, who could get open. Incidentally, Cole Beasley of all people, and provided him with these receivers that could establish space between them and their defenders. That the things improved for Josh, and Josh deserves a lot of credit, and so does Brian Dable. But I think that helps Daniel Jones, and so again, I'm really bothered at the way that the Giants have found the right way to do this.
All right, RJ, let's finish up with a pick for Sunday, and I'm picking the Giants, and I will say this: we use the Tally Site app to put together all of our picks. I'm pretty sure you guys do as well, and I picked the Giants. All right, I did that on your show, and I admitted that I'm picking the Giants, but it's almost like a soft kind of a pick where it's like I feel like if the Giants are going to make that leap and beat the Cowboys at some point and sort of end this long reigning domination by Dallas, this is the week where it needs to happen, at home in the opener, when the Giants are healthy, when there's still some questions about scheme and how different guys are going to get used and all of that. But it bothers me that every writer on my staff picked the Giants to win. I will say that much. It bothers me immensely that it's a 5-0 or 6-0, clear slate of all Giants win the game picks. I'm not sure that I feel real good about that.
I would challenge you to find an SB Nation team site that in week 1 isn't full of people picking their team to win, right? After we've all wandered through the wasteland of the offseason.
Well, maybe I would go to the Cardinals site
Sure.
and we might argue about that.
That's fair. But I mean, I don't think there's value in a real way to the idea that nobody's repeated as the NFC's champion since 2004, right? Like the 2005 Giants have nothing to do with the 2023 Giants, but that's also like, it's also impossible to ignore that, right? Like it's not a real thing, but you have to talk about it at least. So in a similar way, Dak Prescott is 10-0 in his last 10 games. I mean, he's never lost to the Giants except for as a rookie. And so that's, we're not talking like a 3-game sample size, right? We're talking like a 10-game sample size. And some of those games have been a little bit more stressful, obviously. So I'm kind of with you, like, or at least what you've described. I'm not saying it's impossible for the Giants to win, but I have a hard time picking them until we've seen it. I need some proof of concept with regards to this rivalry specifically. I do think the Giants have turned a corner, as I've mentioned, but Dak Prescott and the Cowboys do tend to own them. So until that changes, I'm certainly going to lean on the Dallas side. I'm very anxious to watch the Cowboys because we haven't seen, their starters all throughout the preseason. We haven't seen the Mike McCarthy offense. We haven't seen Micah Parsons fully unleashed, right? The Cowboys at present time have some questions. Tyler Smith, their left guard, is this hamstring thing going to linger? Is Donovan Wilson going to play? But all told, I think I'll still lean Dallas and assume that things stay the same until they don't.
Understood, absolutely. And RJ, as always, we thank you for the time. We hope that Sunday is a good game. Fingers crossed that not only is it enjoyable, but there are no major injuries, no disasters, none of that stuff, because we hate that stuff. I always like to see teams get through as healthy as possible. So let's cross our fingers and hope for that.
That's well said. And what I'm about to say is completely earnest and honest and true. If it can't be the Cowboys winning the NFC East, I hope it's you. As long as it's not the Eagles.
Well, we do have that in common. we do have that in common. Anybody but the Eagles, with all due respect to Brandon Lee Gouton and the folks over at Bleeding Green Nation.
I say with zero
but the
respect.
Eagles.
Yeah, you can offer all respect. I say with zero respect.
So. Well, this is my show. I have to try to show some class.
That's fair. But, as the guest, I don't. Ed, thanks for having me. And best of luck to the Giants this season, except for those 2 particular games.
All right. You as well. All right, Giants fans, thank you very, very much for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.